Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to my Jewish Learning Siyyum for Tractate Rosh Hashanah. It's so wonderful to see you all here again. Feels like it has not been so long since I have seen many of you here. My name is Scheinerman. I edit My Jewish Learning and the Daily Dose of Talmud series. And I'm so delighted to be joined today by Rabbi Lopatin, who's probably a familiar face to you now.
Good to see you, everyone. Yesher Koch, everyone, for finishing Rosh Hashanah.
And we also are very excited to welcome a new face to the Siyyum today. You've read her in the series, but you maybe haven't seen her at My Jewish Learning. This is Rabbi Shuli Passow, excuse me. She's the Director of Community Engagement at B'nai Jeshurun in New York, where she also teaches a weekly Daf Yomi class. And unfortunately, Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter, who was supposed to join us, is not well today, but she sends everybody her love. Okay, so Tractate Rosh Hashanah. This is the 9th tractate for us out of 63 total. So we're 1/7 of the way there in terms of tractates. And we have also just crossed the 680th page off our list in Talmud. So for those who like to keep score, which I apparently do because I announced this at most of these Siyyums, 680 pages down means we have just over 2,000 to go. In a couple of weeks, we'll cross over the 2,000 to go mark. And so I thought I would just say a few reflections of my own about the tractate. And invite you, as I'm chit-chatting about that, to also share your reflections. We always want to know what you thought about the tractate, what surprised you, what did you love, what did you wrestle with? Please tell us in the comments and we'll share some of them out loud over the course of this Siyyum. So the thing that struck me about this tractate in particular, and I'd love to hear all of your reactions, is not only was it very short, but it seemed clear to me that Rosh Hashanah was not as significant as I think of it as being, right? So in my mind, Rosh Hashanah was one of the major Jewish holidays. But Rosh Hashanah, as it became clear in this tractate, first off, the term doesn't exist in the Torah. The Torah doesn't use the words Rosh Hashanah. It talks about a Yom Tru'ah, a day of blasting the shofar. Or sounding the shofar. One of my British authors said, we can't use the word blast in my pieces because that doesn't sound good. The day of sounding the shofar. And that's what it's called in Numbers 29:1 and also in Leviticus 23:24. It's called a Zichron Truah, a memorial day for sounding the shofar. But that's about it. There's nothing else we know about it in terms of it being connected to a historical event or an agricultural cycle. And in fact, the word Rosh Hashanah does appear in Tanakh, not in the Torah, but in Tanakh, in Ezekiel 41, which I'll read for you real quickly in the English. It says, in the 25th year of our exile, in the 14th year after the city had fallen, at the beginning of the year, that's Rosh Hashanah, in the 10th day of the month, on that very day, the hand of the Lord came upon me and brought me here. So it's talking about the beginning of the year as a season, right? It's even saying it's the 10th day of the month. This particular passage is about Yom Kippur. So the Torah, what it strikes me reading all this is that Rosh Hashanah here is kind of like New Year's Day for us, right? It's an administrative day when the calendar turns over, but the ritual behind it is much smaller than some of the other Jewish holidays. So right in America on New Year's Eve, what do? If you're like me, you try and stay up till midnight and you watch the ball fall and maybe you clink glasses and then you go to bed. Right, that's it. And what do you do in ancient Israel on Rosh Hashanah? You blow the shofar. And that's pretty much it, right? Like the ball falling, the shofar blowing, it signals, okay, the calendar is switching over. But there isn't, when I compare it to something like Tractate Pesachim or Yom Kippur, the amount of ritual behind it is much, much smaller. And so it's really interesting to me, I thought, reading this, to see just how insignificant the holiday was, and that makes sense then when you consider that the tractate is much more interested in issues of calendar than anything else. It really is just a about the turnover of the calendar. So that was the thing that really stood out to me about this tractate. But now I'm going to open it up to all of you. If you're just joining us for Tractate Rosh Hashanah, know that we would love to hear your reactions in the comment section, and we will share some of them. Again, what did you love? What did you struggle with? What did you find fascinating? And what do you think about my analysis that Rosh Hashanah is a really surprisingly minor event? Please share with us. Rabbi Lopatin, Rabbi Passow, would you like to say anything about Rosh Hashanah as a minor calendrical moment? Do you agree? Do you disagree?
It's beautiful, very significant what you say. I don't want to agree with you.
Good, don't. Please disagree.
But, I think, you have a lot of strong arguments. I think in some ways, I'm kind of thinking, and this is kind of a theme that I see in the Masechet, is sort of what you make of it. Like if you want to make Rosh Hashanah a profound beginning and the season, it could be huge. And so it's okay that it is, one of the two holidays where people go to shul. Most people are, where shuls are used to be very crowded. So it's what you make of it. I think you're right that really it is kind of minor, but I think that there is room from this Masechet to really take it a distance and expand it and create something very, very special, very significant.
I would agree with that. I think particularly, and I'm now forgetting exactly which page it's on, but the whole discussion about what happened on Rosh Hashanah, and if significant things that happened, and were they either in Tishrei or were they in Nisan, and the idea of the world being created and the different patriarchs being born and dying, and like there is an effort to attribute some historical moments to this date in the calendar. So to say this is significant as part of our national history, as well as what's discussed right at the beginning, that it's a new year for counting different types of cycles. So I think it's maybe not as major as we celebrate it or observe it today. I think you're right in that sense. If you were to ask, the average rabbinic Jew, whatever that means, which is the most important holiday, I don't know that they would say, well, I really only go twice a year on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I think they would probably say, well, I really only go on Pesach, right? But I do think that it does carry some significance with it. And at the same time, I think you're right, Rachel, that there's, there's less discussion in this Masechet about Rosh Hashanah itself than we might expect from a Masechet that is titled Rosh Hashanah. And I was kind of reflecting back on the, not just the content, but also the form of the Masechet. What is the flow and the structure of the Masechet? And in some ways, it kind of, it's kind of like a shofar. It starts really big. It starts with thinking about the whole year, right? There are 4 new years, and let's think about the whole calendar and all the aspects of the cycle of the year, agricultural and monarchy, and right, all of these different elements. And then we start to narrow a little bit to, well, now we're going to talk about Rosh Chodesh and the new moon, and how do you identify the new moon, and let's focus on the month, and let's talk about this particular aspect of the calendar. And then, only then, do we get kind of narrower into discussing Rosh Hashanah itself, the Musaf, the Shofar, what the day signifies. So I kind of feel like the Masechet itself does express a bit of what you're saying, that it's really in the context of the larger calendar. And I think it does kind of look like the Shofar, which is, to me, seemed a little cool.
I see somebody in the comments telling us maybe it should have been entitled Masechet Shofar, Tractate Shofar, instead of Tractate Rosh Hashanah. Okay, keep the comments coming. Rabbis Lopatin and Passow have prepared a few words on the tractate for you, which I'm excited to. They're excited to share now, and we will share some of your comments coming up. So, Rabbi Passow, would you go first for us?
Thank you, Rachel. And again, hello everyone, and welcome, and Yasher Koach on completing this Masechet in whichever way you've been studying it. It's a big deal. I see some folks here who are regulars in my Thursday afternoon class, and so I'm just going to welcome you. I'm so glad you made it. And I'm sorry, what I'm going to teach now is actually what we looked at greater length in class this past week. So you'll get a little refresher. But I think it's a really it's really kind of a powerful and significant little section of the Masechet that in some ways, Rachel, suggests that biblically at least, Rosh Hashanah was not a very significant holiday. As you mentioned, it's not named Rosh Hashanah in the Torah, even though later in the prophets it is. And so this is the very bottom of page 33b of Lamed Gimel Amud Bet, where the Gemara brings a Braita that asks, how do we know that the shofar is what was blown on Rosh Hashanah? Because, as you said, these verses in Leviticus and in Numbers don't actually mention the shofar at all. They say to blast a truah, or the commemorate or remember the blast of the truah. But the word shofar is not actually used. And we know that there are other instruments that one might blow, like trumpets, right? Chatzotzrot. That was another common instrument that was blown in the temple and at other significant moments. So the Braita begins to explore this question of how do we know that we blow the shofar, which again, I think is, for us as contemporary Jews, we might say shofar, that's the first thing we associate with Rosh Hashanah. But that doesn't actually seem to be a connection, an explicit connection, at least in the Torah. And so they prove it by virtue of a interpretive method, interpretive methodology called a hekesh, where they see that there is the same word in one part of the Torah, or sorry, there's an extraneous word in one of Pasuk, in one other verse in the Torah, and they allow that redundancy to say that verse must teach us something about shofar. And what they do is they find this verse in Leviticus that is talking about the Jubilee year, the 50th year after 7 cycles of 7 years, when the shofar is blown. And it says you should blow the shofar on the 10th day of the month in the 7th month. And the rabbis say, look, why did the Torah have to say on Yom Kippur, the 10th day of the month in the 7th month? Once you say Yom Kippur, we know it's the 7th month. Because it says the 7th month, that's coming to teach us a little something that is not explicit, but we're going to tell you what's really underneath that extra word. It's telling you that every time you blow the shofar in the 7th month, and we know that every time you make a truah sound in the 7th month, which we know we're supposed to do on the 1st of Tishrei, it should be with a shofar, right? So they use that interpretive method to say, something extra here teaches us about a practice that we should embrace every year. And they use this to say that the shofar is a mitzvah deoraita, is a biblical commandment. So I think this opens up, I find this so fascinating because I kind of forget every year that shofar isn't mentioned in the Torah. The name Rosh Hashanah isn't mentioned in the Torah. We think this is such a significant holiday, but actually it's not there in our text as we might think. And I think it's also really fascinating because it opens up questions of rabbinic authority, right? Anytime the rabbis are looking to Torah and interpreting it and saying, this is actually a mitzvah that's commanded by the Torah, even though it does not say anywhere in the Torah, blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Those words do not appear anywhere. The rabbis use this to say, this is actually what the Torah is telling us to do, right? This is the mitzvah from the Torah. So it's a tremendous sense of authority that they express here by being able to, or by claiming that interpreting this word this way means that this is a biblical commandment. right? And it also opens up the question, which came up in our class on Thursday, and I don't really know the answer to, but I think is kind of fascinating, and maybe someone knows the answer. What was happening before the time of the Mishnah on Rosh Hashanah, before the time of these Breitot on Rosh Hashanah? In other words, were people blowing the shofar? And the rabbis here are trying to look at, see what the practice is, and then trying to find a biblical source for it, because they're going to great lengths to find a way to prove that the shofar is the instrument, that the Torah tells us that the shofar is the instrument we should be using. So it does make me wonder, maybe people were using a shofar and that was the practice. And so they said, oh, we want to codify this practice and give it religious weight. And so we're going to go and find this way to explain that it comes from the Torah. Or were people blowing trumpets and they said, well, we don't really like the trumpets. We think people should blow a shofar. So let's come up with this interpretation to say that the shofar is commanded by the Torah, and we're going to tell everyone they have to start blowing the shofar. So that's a historical question I don't know the answer to, but it kind of opens up gives us the opportunity to imagine what was the rabbinic interplay with the world around them. So I love that. I love that nugget on 33b.
Thank you, Rabbi Passow. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you and welcome to the people in your class. If you are just joining us today and have never joined us before, thank you for coming to join us as well and learn with us as well. We're getting lots of good comments here in response to a bunch of these issues. And I will admit, I have not fully curated them yet. That's a little hard to do while I'm trying to listen and lead here. But so please bear with me. By the way, if you missed that, Elliot Baskin is saying hi from Colorado, which is the land of elk and honey. You should say hello to him. So let's see. I'll tell you what, Rabbi Lopatin, would you talk a little bit about Rabbi Joshua and Rabbi Gamliel, because I know that was on your mind. And that is probably the most famous story from this tractate.
Ooh, wow.
And I'm sure people will want to revisit it because it is shocking and really memorable. And I will come back with more properly curated comments in a few minutes.
Great. So Rachel, you don't have to pay attention to what I'm saying. And like typical of my sermons, you could sleep, you could read the chats, but no, absolutely. And some of the chats are interesting. Urine and all sorts of things. And if you're not paying attention to the chats, also Rav Passow's beautiful picture in the background of that building and the George Washington Bridge, I think. I don't know, right behind you.
Brooklyn Bridge.
Sorry, the Brooklyn Bridge. Beautiful. So, actually what I wanted to say in interpreting the famous story of Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua, who, this is on 25a in the Mishnah, who accepts Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanus's view of the witnesses that they shekerhen, they are false witnesses. And Rabban Gamliel said, no, these are valid witnesses, and that depends. So therefore, whether the new moon was going to be declared on that day or the next day, it actually follows what Rav Passow was teaching very much in the power of the rabbis. And actually, I'm reading Linda Clifton from Seattle wrote, perhaps that leaves more room for the interpretation, for that interpretation elevates today's power post-temple. So exactly, the idea of not just the power of the rabbis, but that our tradition, and Rabbi David Hartman said this, and I say it over and over again. It's like the one sermon that the rabbis give one sermon, everything's one sermon. Interpretive tradition, that it's not that we just make things up or, we feel something, so we say Judaism is this or Judaism is that. It is an interpretation, but it's so radical and powerful. And what's a fact? I don't know what a fact is. I don't know when, but we know what we declare to be a fact. So were these witnesses false witnesses, or were they valid witnesses? We don't really care about the reality. So that I'll just read that on 25a in that Mishnah. The problem is, so Rabban Gamliel, interesting in the story, remember, he's the one who says that they were valid witnesses. You always have the image of Rabban Gamliel as Mr. No, but actually in this tractate, we'll see he's actually very open-minded and tolerant of simple folk in some ways. So he said the witnesses were valid, but he didn't like that Rabbi Yoshua disagreed and accepted Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanus's opinion that they were that they were false. So he says, and this is again the famous story. I remember learning it years back in 7th grade from Rabbi Wolgamuth of blessed memory in Maimonides. So he says, I want you to come, goes Rani Alech, I'm making a gzeira, a decree upon you. You should come to my house with your money bag and with your stick on Yom Kippur, not just a regular Yom Kippur, but Yom Kippur that falls out on Shabbat, but on your Yom Kippur. So that falls on Shabbat. And I'm sorry, no, not on Shabbat, because that would be, forget about that. But Shachal Yot B'Cheshboncha, that falls your Yom Kippur. So it's just such a beautiful idea that, well, when is the real Yom Kippur? We don't really know. There's almost no such thing as the real Yom Kippur. When he asks, when Rabbi Yoshua says, what should I do? Should I violate my Yom Kippur to, conform with Rabban Gamliel? And he gets advice. Rabbi Akiva says, Kol Masha Asa Rabban Gamliel Asui. Whatever Rabban Gamliel declares is Maaseh Beit Din, the act of a court is done. Eile Moadei Hashem, the verse says in Leviticus, these are the holidays which you shall declare, whether they're in the right times or whether in the wrong times. So you have the power, the rabbis, but it's not just the rabbis, it's Jewish tradition has the power to declare whether those witnesses were valid or not. And I think, we're living in a time where I think there are different narratives. People have different narratives, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's COVID, all these things. And this is really saying, and Rabbi Yoshua, in the end, he does walk to Rabban Gamliel. He's not happy about it. And, that's like, it's noted by the rabbis when eventually they expel Rabban Gamliel or they depose him. This is one of the cases that stands against him. But Rabbi Yoshua does it because we got to follow the system. We got to follow the consensus. And even if you think that this is my Yom Kippur, it's not the Yom Kippur of the Jewish people. And so you have to go with it. And there are, I think that this is all over the Talmud. And it's in some ways it's that the human beings have more power than God. That's other places we'll get to in Bava Metzia and other places. But the key thing is just so fascinating. I might be 100% sure that I am factually correct, that these witnesses are false witnesses. It doesn't matter. The Torah says we follow the Beit Din, we allow the Beit Din to determine it. And once you're questioning the court and the consensus and the determination of the Jewish people, of the tradition, then you're going to question all the way up to Moses. So it's really a powerful view of the in some ways the flexibility that we have with the facts and the power we have to declare the facts. That's very scary, but it's also incredible. I just think that is incredible and allows for incredible innovation and interpretation. So that really animated me and this whole tractate there is that sense of sort of that we have facts, we're dealing with the moon and all these kind of things and the shofar, but then there is, as Rav Passow mentioned, there's the interpretation that really makes it work, and it's human interpretation.
So Rabbi Lopatin, what do you make of Rabban Gamliel? What do you think about him in that story?
I think he's a control freak, and I can't deal with people like that. And I'm glad eventually they kicked him out in Brachot, right? But
they did.
I like reading the story knowing that, yeah, of course he loves Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Yoshua gets to his house and he hugs him and all that, and he says, you're my teacher. I get scared of control people, and Rabban Gamliel really believed in that. And again, eventually that's you can't really tolerate that, but he has his place. He has his place, and everyone has their place. So everyone is part of the tradition, even the people that are a little bit controlling.
Okay, thank you so much for helping us revisit that story. For those of you who don't know the one from Brachot that just got mentioned, I'm going to ask my colleague Ben Harris, who is invisible to you, but helping to make this all work smoothly. It's somewhere in the middle of Brachot. If you know what page it's on, anybody on this chat, go ahead and put it in the comments, and we will get the link to our piece on it up there. I know it's in the middle of Brachot, and I don't know the page off the top of my head. But yep, that's another Rabban Gamliel being a control freak story. And it doesn't end well. So though I was thinking as you were saying this, but maybe he's preserving something really important, which is this idea that we need to keep the power in the hands of the people, right? That's a really simple, you actually gave me a reason to read him more sympathetically than I normally do in that story. Okay, so it seems that some of you on this call, like me, like thinking in things in terms of numbers. So somebody else pointed out for us that we are 25% of the way through Daf Yomi, which is actually a metric I wasn't aware of yet. So kol hakavod to all of you, to all of us. We have made it a quarter of the way through the Talmud. Hard to believe. And we got a number of interesting comments to my provocative comments about Rosh Hashanah being insignificant. So I thought I would share some of those now. So for instance, Sam wrote to tell us that if Rosh Hashanah is not important, why do we have a tractate named for it? So that's fair, Sam. I wouldn't say it's not important. I would say I was thinking of it in terms of relative importance. Like these days in America, I think Rosh Hashanah rises to the level of Passover, say. I think in the Talmud it doesn't, and that actually was interesting to me. Friedel Brief, I apologize if I'm slaughtering people's names, says it's good to see changes from the time of the Talmud in Rosh Hashanah to meet current needs of us here in diaspora. I would be concerned if we did not grow and change. And I like that we use the shofar as a wordless prayer. So yeah, I thought this too. I thought it was really interesting the way that Rosh Hashanah has developed over the years and has become really significant. And maybe it's something we need more in diaspora than in Israel. I hadn't thought about that. And in that vein, we got some questions about the development and comments. So for instance, Fred Passman writes, I was surprised that the shofar service as we practice it today is not addressed, and I suspect that explains the variations even among Masorti Machzorim, even among the books, the prayer books used for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur among the Masorti movement, which is somewhat equivalent to the American conservative movement. And somebody else wanted to know, and I'm going to ask our rabbinic experts here if they know the answer, when exactly Unatana Tokef was added? Because, right, one of the things we think of as the signal prayers of Rosh Hashanah is the Unatana Tokef, the one that asks who will live and who will die, who by fire and who by water, and it runs through a whole list of possible ways that we might come to an end in the coming year. And then it ends with that very famous line that tefillah, tzedakah, what's the third one? Tshuva, tefillah and tzedakah, repentance, prayer, and charitable works can annul the decree. We still have a chance to fix our fate for the coming year. But that is none of that. Right? None of that's like one of the iconic prayers of Rosh Hashanah, but none of that is in this tractate. So help us out, experts. And if you on the call know, because there's a lot of knowledge in this virtual room, when did Unatana Tokef come into the liturgy?
Well, Rav Amnon of Mayence of Germany in the 11th century. That's the story. But I don't know if there's a deeper discussion of how long it took to put that in, but Yeah, it's fascinating. There you go. There, the things that become, like you said, iconic. I guess we don't have icons, but things become so central, even if they're later. And I mean, it's interesting that Aaron, the priest's date of death, is written in the Torah. It's like in the first of Av. It's in the end of the book of Bamidbar, but Moshe's date of death is not written in the Torah, and a lot of people know that's the 7th of Adar. But if you ask me when Aaron died, they might not know. So, like, some things, it's amazing how they just catch on, and there again, the people decide what is important a lot of times and what is not important.
Yeah, I think it also feeds into a larger question about the development of the liturgy and how fixed the liturgy was in the rabbinic period. Clearly, the outlines of our prayer liturgy are there in the Talmud, right? The Amidah as the central prayer that is said 3 times a day, the Shema being recited twice a day. There are lots of Birkat Hamazon is there. There are lots of brachot and tefillot, prayers and blessings that are there in the Talmud. And then there are also things that are not. For instance, as somebody else pointed out in the comments, the shofar service as we have it is not there. And I think we ran a piece in this tractate talking about the Musaf, right? The Musaf service of Rosh Hashanah is, I would argue, the liturgical highlight of the morning. I think that's fairly uncontested. And the outlines of it are emerging in the Mishnah, but not in any great detail. Okay, let me share a few other observations from the group here about this tractate. Okay, Michael Paley shared that he couldn't believe it that such a minor event allowed a witness to violate Shabbat, right? So coming to tell the court, I saw the new moon, and whatever you need to do to come and give that information, that is grounds for violating Shabbat. Yeah, I agree that is that makes you sit up, especially those of us who joined us for 250 pages of Tractate Shabbat and Eruvin, and seem really serious about not violating Shabbat, which speaks to the importance both of the calendar and of this way of having the calendar where it's witnessed and the people participate. Rabbis, anytime you want to jump in and respond to anything, just wave. Okay.
So then I'll wait for a second, but Rav Shuli,
Yeah.
I think you might have had something on a ton of Tokef.
No, I actually didn't. I there's the story of that, the early medieval origins, but there's historical scholarship that shows that there might be pieces of it that came from earlier. I think people are writing some comments on this in the chat, that there were things that were cited in the Yerushalmi and in other texts. So, but when, I don't know the answer to the question of when it actually became a fixed part of the liturgy. And that's a question, that we definitely see here, not about Unatana Tokef, but regarding the Musaf and which brachot are said, which blessings are said, and what order they're said. And there's definitely, and nothing's written down, right? The Shaliach Tzibor, the leader, the service leader, has to say every word out loud, because we're concerned that people don't know all the words, because it's Rosh Hashanah and you say this Musaf prayer once a year, and people are going to forget which verses to say and which words to say and what order it is, which really suggests that there's a fluidity to the liturgy for quite a while. And even now, as somebody mentioned, there are different traditions in different Sidurim and in different communities. So we think of the Sidur as being and the Machzor as being very fixed, right? This is what you say, but in fact, there historically and even contemporarily has a lot of movement.
And I think COVID came in 2 years ago, about a year, 2 Rosh Hashanahs ago, and devastated, at least in traditional synagogues, the piyutim, all of those extra liturgical poems that were in there. A lot of synagogues cut them out. some joyfully cut them out because they were like intimidating. But really, so even though, in Orthodoxy, and I think in traditional Judaism, some of the prayers, there is a matbeah, there is seen as some prayers that can't be changed. But in reality, if you look at the 3 to 5 hours of a Rosh Hashanah service or a Yom Kippur service, they've radically changed in many, many Orthodox, conservative Reform synagogues. And even on a regular Rosh Hashanah, like the Musaf, which Rachel, you said is the most important part, the flagship in some ways. The rabbis always want the cantor to move quickly through it. Once we're done with the Aleinu, let's go. We want to, let's get through it quickly. And so sometimes it's fascinating. The most important parts are the parts that are, people are hungry and got to get through it quickly. So even if you keep the matbeah, this coinage, this strict version of the 10 verses and all that, it doesn't, if you look at how much time it takes from the service, it could really be, we've minimized some of it in a certain way.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm seeing, as expected, we have so many learned other people on this call who are writing in with aspects, at least, of the Unatana Tokef that were earlier. I'm just skimming, so I apologize if I'm not getting it all, but it looks like there are copies of it that were found in the Cairo Geniza that we think are older, that the Yerushalmi has this expression, Shlosha Dvarim Mevatlin et HaGezerah, 3 things annul the decree. It's a complicated history for sure.
Rabbi
Okay.
Peretz Wolf Pruzan to the rescue again with these details. Wow.
All right, let's Rabbi Lopatin, why don't you take us to the end of this tractate so we can finish it out and be fully in Tanit, which we actually started yesterday.
Excellent, great. I also love the idea, by the way, that maybe Natana Tokef is not an Ashkenazi prayer, fully Ashkenazi. I like bringing in the Cairo Geniza and the Yerushalmi, and so it's a richer tradition, which is great, which we really want. So
Can I jump in just before you take us to the very end? I just want to note, and I think this is something I enjoy this is my first time doing the Daf Yomi cycle. One thing I'm finding really interesting is how does a Masechet begin and how does a Masechet end? Because as we've seen a lot, it's not always with what we would expect. And it's not at the very end, and I'm just trying to find exactly where it is, but shortly before the close of the Masechet, there is a discussion about prayers on fast days other than Yom Kippur. And we are about to go into Ta'anit. We are about to go into the Masechet that is full of discussion of these different types of fast days. If there's no rain, if there's a plague, if there's something else, some catastrophic happening in the community. So just to notice that there's a little touch point at the end of Rosh Hashanah that thematically leads us into where we're going with the next Masechet.
Great. Thank you. That's beautiful. So I'm just going to touch on the last few lines where we come into a discussion between of Rabban Gamliel. There was an argument between Rabban Gamliel and all the other rabbis. It's not clear whether it's Rabbanan or Rabbi Meir, but Rabban Gamliel says, the other rabbis say, and this is on 33b, just like the leader of the services is obligated, they're just the same way every individual has to say their own prayer. They can't rely on the chazan, on the cantor, on the leader. Rabban Gamliel says, though, and this is the halacha, however you want to interpret it, this is the way the major authorities rule, shliach tzibor motzi et harabim yidei chovatan. The shliach tzibor, the leader, fulfills the obligation of everyone without them actually doing it. Just guess, listening, something like that. So related to this, the end on Lamed Hey Amud Aleph 35a, this is really 4.5 lines from the end. Amar Rabbi Shimon Chasida. So Rabbi Shimon Chasida says, Poter Haya Raman Gamliel. How powerful was this? This sort of goes back. I guess it's interesting, as much as Rabbi Gamliel was maybe a bit of a control freak, he understood the power of Chazal, of the rabbis and of human beings. So he would say that even afilu am shebesado, even the people who are working in the fields, who lived in the fields, who worked in the fields, who couldn't during the week, can't get to prayers, the shliach tzibor, the leader, pators them, meaning how gets them out of their obligation, works for them. V'lo mavaya, so v'lo mavaya hani de kaimei hachi, and certainly the ones that are in town, that are nearby, they're in the city, that are in hearing distance, something like that. But then adarabba, but then we say hani anise, hani lo anise. Wait a second, the ones that are in the city, they're in town. I mean, they should hustle a little bit, but the ones in the field, it's not their fault. The Tani, we learn in a Mishnah or a Braita, Abba Bereder of Binyamin Bar Chia. It seems like a Braita. Am sh'acharei kohanim. Now, this is an interesting line. The people that are behind the Kohanim, and I don't think this is literally, some people think that when the priests bless the people, you have to stand in front of them, and if you're behind them, you don't get the blessing. It's a hocus pocus. But the people, it means that people that aren't really present for the priestly blessing, einan bichlal bracha, are not part of the blessing because they didn't hustle to make the effort to get in front of the Kohanim or around the Kohanim and hear the blessing of the priests. So therefore, we see that the people that really should make the effort, they're, I don't know if it works for them, but the people in the fields, it's not their fault. They're working hard. They certainly should be part of it. So Ela ki ata Ravin, when Ravin came from Israel, he brought with him the tradition, Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Bar Idi, Amar Rabbi Shimon Chasida. He has a different version. Lopatin Rabban Gamliel Ela Am Shebesadot. That Rabban Gamliel, when he said that you don't have to pray, you can have the leader pray for you on your behalf. Those are the people that Nebuch, they didn't have a chance to pray, they're far away. Those are the people that the leader is motzi, fulfills their obligation. My timer da'an nisei b'malacha. What's the reason? Because they're working so hard, the tradition says, is powerful enough to say that the leader who is leading the prayers can fulfill their obligation of prayer. Aval ba'ir lo. It's interesting to end off a masechet with the word lo, but no. But those in the city, those who have to make the effort, doesn't work for. So in this interpretation of Rabban Gamliel, it really encourages us that, if there are cases that we just can't get to synagogue or we can't do something or we're really trying our best, the tradition understands. But the tradition also expects us to step up and make an effort. And all of you who are finishing this Masechet and doing Daf Yomi, wow, you are really stepping up. You are standing in front of the Kohanim. You are really learning not just for others, but yourselves. So it's an amazing inspiration to be with you all and to finish this Masechet with people that are really stepping up and inspiring the world in Torah and good deeds.
Thank you, Rabbi Lopatin. It is inspiring to be with all of you and to know that we are 25% of the way through. I can't believe I didn't know that before we got here. We're going to say the final brachot, the Hadran and the Kaddish in just a minute. Before we do, I just wanted to let everybody know that in addition to this Siyyum that we do at the end of every Masechet, we also do a weekly Daf Yomi highlights class. The information about that is at the bottom of your Daily Dose email. If you've never noticed it down there, we have a really wonderful rotation of teachers, including both of these guys who teach that class. So come for like a half hour on Thursday mornings to review what was learned in the daf during the week. It's a really nice time. It's a really nice group of people. So you're all invited to that. Although I also wanted to say we are going to go on hiatus for next week because it is Thanksgiving on that Thursday. Okay. All right. So Rabbi Lopatin, you're going to do the Hadran this time.
Yes, great.
And Rabbi Passow, you're going to lead us in the Kaddish.
Okay, terrific. Well, traditionally you say these two lines, or however many lines, 3 times. So, Hadran Allah, we will return to you. Masechet Rosh Hashanah, v'Hadrach Alan, please return to us. Datan Allah Masechet Rosh Hashanah, we will continue to think about you. V'Tatach Alan, think about us. Lo nitneshei minach Masechet Rosh Hashanah, we will not forget you. V'lo titneshei minan, do not forget us. Lo ba'alma hadein, v'lo ba'alma da'ati, not in this world and the next world. Hadran alach masechet Rosh Hashanah v'hadrach alan adaitan alach masechet Rosh Hashanah v'daitach alan lo nishne minach masechet Rosh Hashanah v'lo nishne minan lo ba'alma hadem v'lo ba'alma de'ati. And one more time, so we really remember this. Hadran alach masechet Rosh Hashanah v'hadrach alan daitan alach masechet Rosh Hashanah v'daitach alan lo nishne minach masechet Rosh Hashanah v'lo nishne minan lo ba'alma hadem v'lo ba'alma de'ati. O yehirat somel fanecha nalhenu v'lavotenu. Please, God, shnei yu toratcha umanutenu. Let Torah be our work. Continue with us to the everlasting world. Chanina bar Papa, all these people gave up their lives for Torah. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Chai bar Papa, Abamar bar Papa, Rifram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Sorcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Dara bar Papa, Ha'arev, but still, as devoted we are, make it sweet. Ha'arev na'aran alhenu divrei Toratecha, befinu, b'fi'en amcha b'Yisrael, make Torah sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of everyone in Israel. V'nei kulanu anachnu v'tzitzinu v'tzitzei amcha b'Yisrael, kulanu yodei shemecha v'lamdei Toratecha, oivai techak meini, make me smarter than my enemies. Mitzvotecha ki olam hi li. I will never forget anything, or at least the most important things. We are grateful that you allowed us to be part of the great Beit Midrash of learning Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and you didn't send us off elsewhere, doing something else, not so valuable. Everyone wakes up early or works hard, but let us work hard for Torah, and not kind of meaningless things. Everyone is running in this world. But let us run to important things that make a difference. Just as you allowed us, you allowed us to finish Masechet Rosh Hashanah, let us begin and finish other books. Learn and to teach, and to actually do some of it. Let our Torah guide us. Long days, and a wonderful time living as well. Adonai oz le'amo yitain. May God give strength to God's people. Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom, and may God bless our people with peace.
Amen, amen.
Chati.
So just to note that this special version of the Kaddish de Rabbanan, of the Rabbi's Kaddish that we say when completing a Masechet, the differences are really in the first paragraph. And Rachel, could you make the screen share a little bit larger?
That's Ben Harris, the magician behind the...
Okay, Magician Harris.
I can see his mouse is working on it.
A little larger. So folks can see the translation. Or the Aramaic. I'll read it.
Oh, nice.
Oh, there he did it.
Nice.
Right. So we see that the first paragraph of this Kaddish is very, very different from what we're used to saying, and there's a real emphasis here in messianic times, right? That we're going to praise your name And in this world that you are destined to renew and give life to the dead and raise them to eternal life, to build the city of Yerushalayim, complete the Beit HaMikdash, to uproot idol worship, return service to the heavens to its place, right? So there's this image that's invoked here of messianic times. And there are many, many different understandings in Jewish history of what that actually means. So you don't have to subscribe to the one that's described here, to think that, hopefully we will get to a time in the history of humanity that is a little bit more redeemed and is a little bit more elevated and holy. And the association of learning Torah with the possibility for that type of world to come to exist, to come into being, I think is very, very beautiful. We were noting last year at the when Rav David Feinstein died, the brother of Moshe Feinstein, the son of Rav Moshe Feinstein, that he had said, if you sit down to learn Talmud and you get up and you're not a better person and you're not doing better things in this world, you haven't really studied the daf, right? Which is an amazing thing, that the study of Talmud should be transformational of your character. Maybe the Kaddish here is alluding to that as well, that our study of Torah can transform us so that we can be agents of change in the world and bring this vision of redemption to humanity. Yitzkadal v'yitzkadash shemei Rabba ve'alma dihu atid le'itchadata ule'achayah meteya ule'asaka yatahon lechayei alma ule'mivnei karta Yerushalayim ולשכללה החלה בגבי ולמקר פלחנה נוכרעה מן ארעה ולעטבה פלחנה די שמיה לאתרי וימליך קודשה בריחו במלכותי ויקרא ויצמח פורקנה ויקרב משיחי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתהלל ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן על ישראל ועל רבנן ועל תלמידי הון ועל כל תלמידי הון ועל כל מן דעסקין באורייתא די ואתרא הדין ודי בכל אתר ואתר יהי להון ולכל שלום הרע בחינה וחיסה ורחמין וחיים אריכין ומזוני רוויחי ופורקנה מן קדם ובהון דבשמיא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיא וחיים טובים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. אמן. שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
Eshikach, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Lopatin. Thank you, Rabbi Passow. Thank you to all of you for being part of this wonderful community and for learning with us. And I'm excited to get on to Tractate Ta'anit. It's going to be a fun one. Lots of good stories, lots of interesting stuff, right? It's all about fasting in cases that we don't usually do these days. It's going to be really different and really fun and also really short. So we'll see you back here soon. But if you're missing us and would like to see us even sooner, just know that we have this weekly Daf Yomi class on Thursday mornings, a review of the last 7 Dapim, except for Thanksgiving. So thank you, everybody, for the spirited discussion. Thank you, rabbis, for the learning, and we will see you all soon.